All right, so from the beginning. Well, first, before we get into this video, I just want you to understand that the information in this video and the information in the next couple of videos constitutes really the limits to my understanding. The topics in these videos are very deep topics. Things like true objective reality, the truth, natural law, human consciousness. These are topics that you can jump down and focus on for pretty much your entire life and really get into the nitty gritty of each topic and come to know all sorts of things that can be very helpful for your life. But you don't have to do that. And I don't think that it's worth the amount of effort that some people put into jumping down these rabbit holes and focusing on these things for years on end, because there's particular generalities in these topics that are more meaningful and useful for us if we're going to be successful in our society. And so I acknowledge that we have to know these topics in order for us to be successful, and understand the only reason why I would ever talk about a topic is because I believe it's important for us to know, for us to raise the probability of us having success in our society. And so I must also acknowledge that diving deeper into these topics has not proven to be extraordinarily helpful, so long as you understand the general principles or rules of these topics. And so we also have to acknowledge that I need a place to start when talking about all of this stuff. And so why not start at the biggest picture that I can possibly think of? And the biggest picture that I can think of is talking about the realities that we find ourselves in. And yes, there's two realities that we find ourselves in, two games, if you will. I call them games because there's rules to these games. And if we learned anything from South Park, its most recent episode, the transsexual episode, there's one thing that we can learn from that episode. It's that those who are aware of the rules, those who know the rules to the game that they're playing, have a natural, unfair advantage over those who don't know the rules to the game. And so we're going to spend some time over the course of the next few videos to talk about these rules so that we can best organize a strategy that'll give us the best opportunity to succeed in these games. Because first and foremost, we have to know the game that we're playing. Because the strategies that work in the game of chess may not be so effective in another game, in a game like football or something. And so first and foremost, we have to know the game that we're playing, because this is all about being successful. I'm going to reiterate that a lot. I wouldn't talk about this topic if I didn't think that it would help us be more successful. So we have to start with understanding the two games that we play, because there's really two realities that we exist in. One is like a matrix inside of this thing called true objective reality, something that I talk about as synonymous with natural law. And we have to know the generalities of those rules, because within there is a matrix, a human linguistic matrix that is controlled by language. And we also have to know the nuances and rules to that game as well if we're going to be successful in that matrix. And I figure that you're going to find yourself in that matrix as well if you're able to locate an internet connection and find this video. And so we have to know both of these games and how they intermingle with each other and what the rules are, so that we can best maximize our probability for success. And so let's start by first talking about the first overarching game that's being played, and that is from true objective reality, from that perspective. And so first and foremost, I want you to think about this topic a little bit differently, because when we talk about like what's out there, what's outside of human consciousness, we look at all of the things, the stars in the sky, the galaxies, the universe itself, and we say it's vast and wide and huge, but then also simultaneously extraordinarily small and quantum level sized, atom sized, atomic level sized, and really small and super large. And there's so much to see and experience. And while I'm not denying that, I just don't think that that's a very successful way to look at the universe. I think the best way to look at the universe is from the perspective of the observer, the individual, you. Let's start from there and let's look out and let's ignore all of the things that we cannot perceive and focus on the things that we can perceive, the things that do affect us. Because what is experiencing when you're walking around reality is that you know some things. These things are known as the known. You know these things and you're comfortable around these things. And then every so often when you push your comfort zone or you're traveling or you're going around looking at new things, you experience things that are unknown to you. And we take this experience of experiencing what I call random unknown data structures. We take it for granted because we don't experience them very often. But there was a time in all of our lives when the vast majority of things that we experienced were unknown to us. Just think of a 3-year-old. When you were 3 years old and you were experiencing all of these things around you and you had no idea what all of these things were. You didn't know the labels that we've already determined these things as. You didn't know what that thing over there was. What is that? And you'd ask your mom, like, what is that thing? Your mom would be like, oh, that's just a tree. And you're like, tree? Whoa, that's amazing. Well, that process of learning new things, of processing unknown data structures, still occurs almost exactly the same way. We have to experience these unknown data structures and process them somehow and turn them into something that can be useful for us. And that's what we're going to talk about first and foremost, because that experience is what is occurring at all times when you're experiencing things that you don't know, when you put yourself out in the unknown, when you're trying to gain knowledge and information on things that you don't yet know about. Knowledge is power. So this is something that we have to focus on because we need that power. We need knowledge. And so we have to start with an assumption that there truly is a reality outside of the human mind. That there actually is stuff out there and that we're not just creating that stuff with our mind. And when we start there, we have to refer to that something as something so that we can talk about it, and that's what I call the unknown. But in order for that thing to become known, it has to interact with human consciousness. It has to interact with a person who is observing it through the process of observation and experiencing the thing. We can determine the unknown to be something that we can turn into something known. How does that work? Well, before the unknown structure is made known, it appears as random, unorganized, chaotic, raw structures of data. Data is random. It's chaotic. It's unknown. It's not organized. It doesn't have a pattern. It doesn't appear to have a pattern to us just yet. And so we don't understand it when we first see it. And when the raw data is organized by the individual, it becomes known to the individual. The data structure has then thus been processed into something meaningful. Now it has meaning. It matters. It matters. Random data structures that have been found to have meaning, that have patterns that we can recognize, become formed. They become formed into something. So random data structures that are formed, that become formed, turn into information. Random data structures that are formed and that now have meaning to the individual can now be utilized as information by the individual. And so we have to understand what information is, because information is what is conveyed or represented by a particular arrangement or sequence of data, organized patterns of data that mean something to us. That's what information is. And so we attribute value on a data structure as it's being formed into information that we can use. We determine what's meaningful about a data structure, based on how it interacts with us, observing it, with us experiencing it, with us observing it, and how it acts in its environment and how we can use it in our everyday lives. And as stated, information is associated with data, but it's also associated with knowledge, as information is data with context, with meaning attached to that data based upon an individual's knowledge base. Data represents the value attributed to a thing, and knowledge signifies that we associate a thing to be identical or similar to another thing that we already know. And so when we experience an unknown data structure, we attach meaning to that data by processing that data with our mind. And so we first have to understand that if no processing occurs, if we don't observe the random data structure, if we don't care enough to pay attention to it, then that random data structure will remain unknown to us. We will not know it because we did not process it. And so, first, processing must occur. If processing occurs, then meaning will be extrapolated based upon our knowledge base, which turns the data structure into information. Now, whether that information is useful or accurate is completely dependent upon the individual's ability to process information. And so we're going to be spending a lot of time and effort talking about how to properly process information. But first, we just have to talk about this process at a very general level. And so, the point is that we form the order out of the chaos of the unknown by locating meaningful patterns within the data structures. We locate the meaningful patterns by identifying patterns within the unknown data structure that we already know. Okay? So I hope that you're starting to see a connection between our knowledge base and coming to know more things. And so in other words, when we observe an unknown structure of data that we choose to process, that we choose to learn, we immediately, and this is a very natural process, start to utilize our knowledge base to locate similarities, metaphors, similes, analogies, things that are like this thing, similarities between the unknown data structures and our already formed known knowledge base. And we attribute similar meaning to the new data structure compared to what we already know. And so for just a quick example, so let's say you're looking out in the distance and you see something and you're like, what is that? What is that thing? And as you get closer to it, it starts to kind of look like a tree. And so you say to yourself, well, based upon my knowledge of trees, that thing looks like a tree, so that thing probably is a tree. You'll never know for certain, but it appears that it probably will also be a tree as well. And that's solely based upon the fact that you know what a tree is, what a tree looks like. And then this really dives into inductive reasoning. This is using your knowledge base ultimately to draw a conclusion. Let's look at another example. Let's talk about monies. And so, if you already know what $1 is, and you already know what the number 100 is, then you can utilize that information to extrapolate more knowledge. So let's say, for example, you know what a $1 bill is, and you know what a $100 bill is, but you've never experienced in your life a $100 bill. You've never experienced before, you never observed it before, you didn't know it was real, didn't know it existed. Well, that's a $100 random data structure. And based upon your knowledge base, you can extrapolate based upon looking at it, and you look at it and you go, well, this looks like a dollar bill, but it has 100 on it. So maybe this is a dollar bill that has the value of $100 bills because it says 100 on it. You'll never know for certain, but you can gain knowledge simply by utilizing inductive reasoning based upon your knowledge base, your already known knowledge base. And so let's look at this example again. Let's say hypothetically you've never experienced a dollar bill in your life before. You've never observed one before. You've never used one before. You've never seen it before ever. And then let's say you bump into a piece of paper that says that it's worth $100 bill. And you look at it and you're like, what is this thing? My knowledge base says that it just looks like a random piece of paper that has something printed on it. Well, your knowledge base is lacking the information necessary to extrapolate what that thing is. So, according to the individual, that piece of paper is worthless. It has as much worth as any other piece of paper. And so you'll look at it and you'll be like, this has no worth, this has no value, it has no meaning to me. And so you'll throw it away. And I hope that this example kind of just points out the importance of expanding your knowledge base, having a very wide base of general knowledge, because as you can see, you don't need to know every single dollar bill in existence. You just need to know some particular things, some general things, some tendencies within very wide ranges of knowledge in order to be able to extrapolate what things are and to come to more knowledge. And so what these generalities are is what we're going to be focusing on so that we can maximize our net, we can widen our net by touching on things that we need to know in order to gain more knowledge, because that's what this is all about. Because this is our natural processing ability that allows us to learn, that allows us to gain information. Remember, knowledge is power. Information is the only true resource in existence. I'll be saying that a lot. And ultimately, the more resources that you have at your disposal, the more raw materials that you have, the more likely it'll be that you'll be able to build something that is worthwhile. So we should maximize our knowledge base. And remember, this is just reiterating that this is why knowing a lot of things at a general level allows us to learn faster, because as opposed to specific knowledge, general knowledge offers a wider net to find more meaning in more things as long as we're capable of reasoning from those generalities. And don't worry, we'll talk about reasoning a whole lot over the coming years, talking about this stuff. But first, we just have to know the general things. And so in regards to true objective reality, there's only a few general principles that control true objective reality, which I'll be using as synonymous with natural law in the coming videos. Because if you know these general principles or general rules that govern our reality, then you can actually reason from these generalities to come to know nearly all things that are occurring within this reality, because nearly all things stem from those principles. And this is a quote from Miyamoto Musashi. He says, "If you know the way broadly, you will see it in everything." And so, moving on from the biggest picture, let's talk about the human matrix that exists within true objective reality. Let's talk about human reality, very human things. Let's start with another example. The Dead Sea Scrolls, sold for $250 by the Bedouins who found the Dead Sea Scrolls. They didn't know what they had uncovered, and they thought they were getting a good deal for it. The next person, who had a better idea of what he had because he knew the thing was old and he could figure out kind of what it was, that he knew that it was much more important and should have much more value and have much more worth. And so he was able to sell these scrolls for close to $250,000, which is a 1,000% ROI solely based upon knowledge base, an understanding of the value of a thing based upon the knowledge that they had. But little did this guy know, who sold it for $250,000, that what he had in his possession was actually probably one of the greatest archaeological finds in biblical history. And he didn't know that. And so there's always deeper knowledge that you can know. There's always more information that you can gain that will help you understand just how valuable the things are that you have in your possession. And so, ultimately, this all starts with knowing your worth. An individual's worth. Your worth. Human worth. One human's individual's worth. What's your worth? Do you know how much you're worth? Well, if you do, write it in the comments section. I'd like to see how many people answer this seriously. But I'll give you a hint. Your worth is based upon how good you are at creating meaning out of nothing. Creating meaning from your mind and your mind alone. We're going to talk about that a lot in the coming videos as well. I bring this up because there's a second reality that you need to be aware of. It's the human or linguistic reality that's created by humanity, by our society, by our cultures, by our customs, and furthered along by our technology. Now, I'm going to warn you, I'm about to quote the Bible, so I just don't want to weird you out. I don't do this often, but I just really liked this passage, and it was in the beginning of the Bible when I was reading it. I thought it was cool. So this is Genesis 2:19. And out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every fowl of the air, and brought them unto Adam to see what he would call them. And whatsoever Adam called every living creature, that was the name thereof. In this creation story, this biblical creation story, it's God that created the universe. God created the universe. But they made it a point to tell us that it was mankind that named the universe, that labeled the universe. And that's a big deal. It's a very big deal because those labels, they are wholly different from our true objective reality. They create a subsection within reality that has different rules and has different nuances that we also have to be aware of. And so, for example, objectively speaking, something like $1 or the Dead Sea Scrolls has no value. Neither of them have any value. They're worth nothing according to objective reality. So objectively speaking, they have no value. USD has no value in true objective reality. I'm just reiterating that. But $1 does hold value within our society, within this human matrix. It does have value because we say so. And so this kind of proves that we can create meaning and value with the use of language and communication because, remember, Adam had to speak the words. He had to say the words. This is a cow. This is a snake. Watch out for those snakes. And so, language and communication is how we do this. And in doing so, we create the unintended consequence of isolating ourselves from experiencing true objective reality. Language and communication, well, first, language and communication is just the process of getting whatever is in here, inside your mind, and getting it out there, out to other people, by whatever means necessary. So that can be art, it can be painting, it can be drawing, it can be writing, speaking, facial expressions. It encompasses all methods of communication. That's what I'm talking about when I say language and communication, which I'm only going to say language because both of those words are super long. And so, getting back on track, it's language that isolates us from what's truly going on in true objective reality because by its nature, language, labeling and defining objective reality is impossible. Because true reality cannot be defined. You can't define infinity. You can't define all things that exist as one thing, which is what the universe is. Universe, one verse, one song. And so language, in its nature, defines things. It limits things. It puts boundaries on things. It says that's a tree, but if you zoom out far enough, that's a forest, and a tree is within a forest. Or that's a cell, but if you zoom out far enough, that's a human. It's like, words do that, and they define and put boundaries on things that really you can't really talk about anything, objectively speaking, without talking about all things. And so really you start, when you're talking about true objective reality, you're really talking about general principles that have to be understood. But there's no specific one thing, and words really define things, and you can't define infinity. And so language naturally does this when you call a thing a thing. So, for example, like you see a tree and you call it a tree. You're separating it from all other trees. You're separating it from the forest. Which you can't do because you have to include all things if you're going to talk about something objectively speaking, which makes it very hard to talk about true objective reality, which is another reason why we don't pay too much attention to it. And so I point this out because we like to think that our words align with objective truth, but they can't. Because our words label things as separate from other things. And we do this, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with language, I'm just pointing out what it does, because this isolation is what the matrix is. And we do this with language for better communication and navigation through our reality. Language is an extremely useful and unprecedented technological advancement, but it does have the consequence of creating a matrix within true objective reality that has a completely different set of rules that creates a second game that we also have to be aware of, that has different rules and nuances that we just have to be aware of if we want to be successful within that reality as well. And so just talking about language, language is also how we can create a piece of paper that has meaning and value within the human matrix while having no value outside of the human matrix, outside of a matrix that doesn't accept USD. So in fact, you can even find some humans today existing around the world who will not accept US dollars because it has no value where they exist today, which is that far outside of this linguistic matrix that is defined by English, defined by the almighty dollar. And it's language that does that. A dollar is worth something because on the dollar bill, it says that it's worth $1. It says it, it spoke it. And that's what I mean by language. It's saying something, it's telling you something, it's giving you meaning with nothing more than just the ability to speak, which is incredible. But trust but verify, because it's not just every piece of paper that has a $1 on it. It says it's worth $1, but that's meaningless because words that don't have force behind them, that don't have action behind them, that don't have truth behind them are worthless. So if I try to hand you a piece of paper that has $1 on it, and it's just a random piece of paper, you're not going to accept that. That's going to be just as worthless as any other scrap of paper. But because there's force behind the USD, a particular piece of paper that has a $1 bill on it that's very particular, that a society has agreed upon and consented to using as currency, does have value. And that's pretty incredible. And it's all based on nothing. Nothing at all, not even gold anymore. It's not based on anything. And I can argue that even gold has little value in isolation. And that's okay. Okay? I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist here. I'm just pointing out the universe, the reality that we exist in. And this is one of them. We have pieces of paper that have no objective value, but we imbue value upon them based upon the society that we exist in, for currency, for exchange, being able to exchange things more effectively. And so I say just roll with it, because it's okay, it's helpful, it's useful. And we also have to understand that we don't make the rules in this human reality matrix, okay? Unless you're president of the United States or something, but let's talk about that in a minute. So, we didn't make the rules to this game, but we're sure going to know them. We're going to know these rules. We're going to understand them. We're going to see what works and what doesn't within this matrix. Because again, going back to South Park, we have to know the rules because the rules give us an unfair advantage when we're competing against people who don't know the rules. And you also have to understand that most people don't know the rules. So we're going to have a great advantage moving forward in being able to share our information to create meaning out of our thoughts and our ideas and expressing them out with force, with action in the real world, which we'll talk about in the coming videos. And so, talking about this reality as a whole again, our society has created a matrix within true objective reality that is controlled by the general principles of natural law, but also has much more unique and nuanced rules within the human matrix that we also have to acknowledge of. We also have to have knowledge of. We also, if we want to succeed within this matrix. And so I want to just point out that just because we have created this matrix within true objective reality, within natural law, that doesn't mean that natural law doesn't permeate through our reality. It just means that there's other things that we have to be aware of when we exist within this matrix. And so, unlike the laws of nature, the human matrix is controlled by language. It's words that control our reality. Do you think that you live in a society that's controlled by words, controlled by language? Well, I'll argue that if you live in a country that has a functioning government, then you do. Because the law is nothing more than words. It's nothing more than language that controls the behavior of society. It makes us more systematic. It makes us more uniform. It makes us more uniform. It makes us more predictable. It makes us predictable individuals within a large group of sometimes hundreds of millions of people, sometimes even 1 billion people in some matrices. And it's language, ultimately, also on top of this, that controls our technology. Okay? It's code. Learn to code. Its code is written, and it controls all the technology that you see. Everything that you see right now is written out into code. It's written out into code. So how you see it, how you experience it, how you can use programs is completely determined by the language of the code that creates the program. And remember, well, I already pointed that out, but let's reiterate. The human matrix is not wholly separate from natural law. It exists within the rules of the laws of nature, but within the human matrix, language is the ruler. Because law is written in words and language, and in a functioning country, we follow the law. And while these words, these man-made laws, bear no control over natural law, over the laws of nature itself, these man-made laws do control our behavior to an extent. And so we need to know the general principles of the man-made laws as well if we're going to succeed in our society. And this isn't a big deal. This isn't going to be like constitutional law or anything. There's just some generalities, some tendencies that we have to be aware of when we exist in a country that's controlled by English common law or by American individualism, laws like that. And these things have tendencies, and they actually tend to emulate natural law in itself anyway. So it's almost like it's reiterating itself. And, we can prove that by the word nation, which is a term supposed to talk about a country. And it also has the same root to the word natural. Nation, N-A-T, natural, N-A-T, and then A-L, and then I-O-N are just suffixes. That just means state of or people of. And so, as we found that humanity's most successful countries, the most successful nations and governments, have a tendency to embody and enforce the laws of nature within their society. This is the objective difference between right and wrong, which is known as morality. This is human rights. The rights of an individual are being preserved by particular laws that protect those rights from people who are trying to take away those rights. And when a country goes by the wayside and starts acting not in accordance with the natural principles of the universe, those countries tend to fail over time. They tend to need improvement extraordinarily quickly because the people existing within those matrices are not happy, and they get frustrated and they start protesting and rioting and rebelling and creating revolution. I hope you're starting to see some foreshadowing of stuff that we have to talk about to understand what the heck is going on out there within our matrix right now. And so we'll talk about this a lot, but understand that right now I haven't even defined natural law, so there's a lot that we have to go over before we can start to understand this stuff and understand the nuanced nature of our linguistic reality. And so, why do humans do this? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why don't we just live in harmony with natural law, whatever that natural law is? Well, it's because humans have a terrible memory. We don't remember things very well, and we're all individuals. at no point in history up until like the advent of the internet have there been a catalog of all of the information that's necessary in order to quickly form a successful anything, really. And so each individual needed to come to know the knowledge necessary to live in harmony with the general principles of natural law, which had to be figured out themselves in the first place by some of history's most intellectually and most intelligent people like ever, like Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, and further along by many different people throughout history, and further along by philosophies and religions, and then later science with Newton and Descartes. And what we found is that since everyone has their own individual knowledge, it would make sense if we all came together and started agreeing upon certain particular things that we would choose to live by. And this is what actually creates our customs, our cultures, and our traditions, and our language that we use to unify a group of people, not to turn them into a collective drone set of people, but to be individuals that exist in relative safety and security that can be progressed based upon knowledge that has already been accumulated by other individuals who are way smarter than me, individuals that are way smarter than anyone really, that really progressed humanity in a great way. And without language, most of their information, if not all of it, would be lost. And so we would have to start back to square one once these individuals left us. But we don't have to do that anymore because we imbue the knowledge of our ancestors into our society to create this reality. And it's language that does that first and foremost. And so, the human matrix has rules and laws and customs that are written in words, which allows us to survive better, to thrive, to grow, to improve, and to gain more knowledge, to improve the culture, the society that we exist in, and further it along as well. And our society creates this bubble of order, known as the known, that's based on already proven knowledge that works and is already in creation for us to live in relative safety and security compared to an individual that lives outside of a society in which they are living in a state of near constant danger, and it's not as safe as living inside of a society. So further, within our society, our language also acts as a placeholder for the real thing. And so we can use these placeholders, our language, to better communicate information more quickly. And so, going back to the tree, a tree is just a data structure that has a particular arrangement of data. And that particular arrangement appears to us as a woody plant that has a big main trunk and usually a distinct crown at the top made of branches and then leaves. And then it also has roots that stick into the ground. And then the tree just kind of hangs there and has a particular look to it. It's brown and green. Well, with the use of language and just using a placeholder word, I can express that data structure to somebody else by simply saying, that's a tree. Much easier. And so information can be shared extremely easily within such an environment, but only if you know the definitions to the terms. And that's really the key to having success within a linguistic-based reality. Knowing the meaning of the words that we speak and the words that exist in our laws. This is how we thrive in a society that's controlled by words. Knowledge of language becomes of paramount importance. Knowledge of the placeholders that we have already accepted as the known data structures, and understanding how this all interacts and how it forms our reality, which is known as grammar, general grammar, which we'll talk about a lot in the coming videos as well. And so, if you know the meaning of the terms, so really, you have to know the meaning of terms. But again, it's just like the general principles of natural law. There's just a few general things that you have to know in order to navigate pretty much all of the laws and stuff and rules that exist in our reality. And this becomes very important when we start talking about right and wrong, and knowing your rights, and knowing what possession means, knowing what ownership means, understanding responsibility, and again, knowing your rights, and these other terms that largely govern natural law and thus have been largely emulated by our man-made laws. But in closing, I just want to point out that if any of this sounded nutty to you, and if any of it was confusing, that's okay, because this is just the first video of many videos that I'm going to try to continue forming something that actually makes sense, and that I don't expect anyone to get very much out of this, because this is just telling you what game we're playing, and to tell you that there's actually two games that are going on that we have to be aware of, and that really they both emulate each other, so it's not a big deal. And there's only a few things that we have to know in order to expand our knowledge base exponentially. And we're going to talk about those in the coming videos very shortly, because we're forming this foundation. And then we're going to build upon that foundation in the next video. So I'll see you there.